emergency welcome to Origins. I mean, we have an incredible lineup for you today, and what's so important is the fact that I think everything syncs together perfectly. By the end of the day, your head is just going to be buzzing with everything that you're going to have learned and how the whole thing fits together, basically. But the first speaker of the day, a lady by the name of Debbie Cartwright, is somebody who you will have seen her name in the acknowledgements of essentially all of my books, basically. And there's a reason for that, because she, if there can possibly be a muse, basically, for me, this is the person. And there is a number of things that I have to credit her for, but most importantly was that back in the 90s, she basically said, you've got to start looking into southeastern Turkey. This not only was the place of the Garden of Eden, but there was something massive happened in this area in the past, which we need to understand, that's remembered in myth and legend as the Watchers, the Nephilim and the Anunnaki. And so, in other words, there's a good chance that I wouldn't have got on to Göbekli Tepe as quickly as I did without having that, that clue to what was going on in that region. And of course, I went there. But anyway, she's also essentially the person that says, Andy, you've got to do this, basically. You've got to put the Denisovans in your book. Really? Well, it's a book about sickness. Yeah, but put it in, because if you don't, other people will be. But anyway, without further ado, she now is here presenting an incredible lecture which will set us up for the day on trying to understand the mindset of the people involved with all of these ancient sites, particularly those of Tash Tepeler, but essentially around the world. So without further ado, I introduce you to Debbie Cartwright.
This is it, yes, Shamanism, Animism of the Ancients in praise of shamans, because that's what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to be praising shamans. So, Shamanism. Nobody today, I think, is going to argue that it is a massively important part of the Tash Tepeler culture, and that's the name for the builders of the world's oldest temples like Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. They're now referred to as the Tash Tepeler culture. But if you study these sites and their symbolism, which many people in this room do, it's pretty clear that shamanic practice could be the main reason behind why these sites were built 12,000 years ago, and that shamanic practice itself may play the most significant part in answering the big question of what were the ancients up to. That's the question. But if you look at what anthropologists and archaeologists are currently saying about shamanism at Göbekli Tepe, it's described as the religion of the primitive hunter-gatherer or primitive nature worship, i.e. it's still regarded as primitive, period. So there they are, look. They're primitive hunter-gatherers with their primitive Flintstone-style animal skins and their primitive religious outlook, and in their primitive Flintstone-style temple. I mean, some of you might be a bit young to remember the Flintstones, but don't worry about it. So, but if you want another perspective on Tash Tepeler, other than the Flintstones, there are independent popular authors such as Graham Hancock, Hugh Newman, and my friends and colleagues, Graham Phillips and Andrew Collins. And these are people who have all made significant steps forward in attempting to understand what the ancients were up to and in building these megalithic sites. And long may this research continue. But I'm not going to talk about Tash Tepeler culture specifically. I'm not going to talk about Göbekli Tepe or Karahan Tepe and the meaning of their monuments, megaliths, symbols, alignments. I'm going to leave that to my colleagues. Because when academics talk about ancient cultures, they rarely include any philosophical perspective. That is, the human element, if you will, the personal, the phenomenology of traditions, customs, beliefs, practices. The philosophy of all this is never explored with any substance or conviction. So all of this is usually avoided in favour of the sort of common rationalist, analytical overview. And in terms of the esoteric, researchers, whether they're academic or independent, rarely go there. Well, I'm going to go there. So, a little bit about me. I am a published author. This is my self-help title, Esoteric Psychology, and it's under my maiden name, Warner Little Brown. It's a second-hand, rare book now, but there are going to be some copies at the back, but they are very limited. Can't get it now. But the words esoteric itself, esoteric, philosophy, supernatural, they're all dirty words these days. And there are two camps, I think, which get the limelight when it comes to ancient history and archaeology, and that is either pure scientism or a materialism or a religious view, a religious mysticism. And those two camps are the only views that count. But if you dare to explore the esoteric or the supernatural rationally, you are never taken seriously. Well, in my experience, that's the case. Stories of religion, Bible stories, are regarded with more gravitas than anything esoteric. Go figure. So, to start, I will clarify, contrary to some assumptions maybe about me, that I'm definitely not a mystic. My views are realistic. Simplistic? No, I'm not going to go there. Right. But I am an academically educated philosopher, but I think that education has been wasted. So I've turned out to be a bit of a rational supernaturalist, I suppose. But the good thing is that because of that unique overview, I've got a good, unique perspective, and that's what I want to share with you. And I think it's one that my philosophy professors would put their hands in their head and cry over, but, you know, whatever. So, everything we think we know about shamanism may be wrong. So when most people think about tribal shamanism, if they know what it is at all, we'll think of the tropes, the stereotypes. So, i.e., the native savage or witch doctor with the bone through the nose, dancing about, wearing bits of animals and chanting mumbo jumbo. So these images here are all typical colonial depictions of shamanic practice. They're expressing it as something primitive, even evil or beastly, something abhorrent to superior, modern, civilized morality. And I think that even today, the shamanism of Tash Templar is still regarded this way by a lot of people who are involved in discussing it, surprisingly. So where did this trope come from? Well, undoubtedly, I think with the arrival of organised religion, colonialism and its conditional partner, religion, over the last 2 millennia has vilified and outlawed tribal shamanism as black magic, ultimately, and consequently, worldwide, its practice has severely waned. So, through its oppression, I think, by mostly Western civilization over such a long period of history, it is still today mostly scoffed at as any kind of serious epistemology. What I mean by that is a form of knowledge or human understanding of reality, our epistemology. So it's fair to say that colonial man probably even feared it. And I think it's this fear that takes comfort in regarding tribal shamanism as nothing but superstition, or at best, a delusional, mystical belief, mumbo jumbo. Okay, so if you lot are with me so far, and that the discoveries of the Tash Templar culture has convinced you that it's not a primitive superstition, what exactly is shamanism? So, as the wonderful Terence McKenna says here, shamanism is not some obscure concern of cultural anthropologists. It is a set of practical psychotherapeutic techniques. It was how people attained some kind of access to the sacred. As a practice, shamanism goes back to the very origins of civilization. Well, we all know that here. But it's been around for over 150,000 years, probably longer. It in it's a perspective that existed worldwide and consistently down those millennia. This is despite many tribal cultures never moving or interacting with other populations to share this perspective. They had the same one. So the question is then, or the bigger question is, how can cultures worldwide that have never crossed or share the same perspective? So, as I said, it's a bigger question, and I'm not going to have time to go into that here, but it's an important one because I think it is a testament that, it's a testament to the proposal that there is some kind of objective reality to shamanism. And therefore, I think, as we shall see, some kind of objective reality to what humans might be capable of. Right. So what epistemology, what kind of concepts, what kind of ideas are behind shamanism? And that's called the ontology. What kind of meaning is behind it? And I want to include this quote by Madame Blavatsky from the Theosophical Society, even though she's nothing to do with it, because I think she was onto something. And it's everything in the universe, throughout all its kingdoms, is conscious, i.e. is endowed with consciousness of its own kind and on its own plane of perception. And I think although much of the core teachings of theosophy are considered outdated and were only acceptable in context with the 19th century and Victorian values, I still wanted to highlight this because I think she's hit the nail on the head about some older, profound understanding of reality. And this sort of statement, to be made by a Westerner of the rationalist tradition, was unprecedented for its time, because I should know most philosophers and metaphysicians of traditional Western history, and at that time certainly, believed that only mankind possessed consciousness. It always takes a woman to change the paradigm, I think. So, and I think it shows that fundamentally Blavatsky understood a very ancient living perspective, and she saw its value as an ontology, i.e. a set of concepts dealing with the nature of being itself. And I think it's one that spanned eons. It still exists in the modern world. So what is that ontology? What can we call it? That ontology is animism. So animism, as a word, is an anthropological term. It's used to describe this so-called primitive nature worship. The modern definition of this word emerged from the publications of anthropologist Irving Hallowell, who researched the Ojibwe tribe of Canada in the 19th century. It was his anthropological studies of 5 Ojibwe chiefs and their shamanism that resulted in the development of the term and the concept of animism, I suppose. The term is not used by the indigenous cultures themselves, or most people that have animistic perspectives, paradoxically. It's a term not used by shamans, and certainly not the shamans of the Ojibwe, to describe their spiritual beliefs. It is then merely a term that us colonials can use to try and understand their beliefs and this so-called nature worship. So tribal communities, I've said, had no need to describe. They don't have a word for it because they don't have any need to describe their ontology or their beliefs. And this is because animism and its practical application, shamanism, is not perceived as a belief. What is animism? So, firstly, this is the real kind of academic bit. It is the perspective that objects, places, and all living things possess a consciousness. And that consciousness means that all things do not merely possess mind, all is mind. All is mind. And that all things, animals, plants, rocks, rivers, trees, mountains, weather, systems, even language and human mythologies created by mind become mind. They are animate and alive. It is the perspective that all material phenomena have agency, that there exists no distinction between the non-material and the material realities, the physical and the metaphysical, or beyond the physical. There is no distinction between noumena, mind, and phenomena, the world. Mind and phenomena, noumena and phenomena are one. So rather than a belief, animism is a phenomenology. It's an expression of the relationship between mind and the world, between noumena and phenomena. It is a way of being, I suppose, a way of understanding the natural world. It is a term that stands, I suppose, for the connection between humans and the seen and the unseen. So through the ontology of animism, I think we can definitely assuredly say that shamanism is not a religion. It is a set of practical psychotherapeutic techniques, the ideas behind it being animism. And I think it's important to understand this because anthropologists and archaeologists today still insist on talking about animism and shamanism as a form of religious practice centred around nature worship, as if, like modern monotheism, it were a form of faith or worship. But the shaman neither worships anything or needs faith in anything beyond. And this quote here from Michael Hahn, who's a really open-minded anthropologist, is quite important. Shamanism is a path of knowledge, not faith, and that knowledge cannot come from me or anyone else in this reality. To acquire that knowledge, including the knowledge of reality, it is necessary to step through the shaman's doorway and acquire empirical evidence. So as we said, animism is not a belief, it's a living phenomenology where the intentionality of consciousness, because consciousness is always intentional towards something, allows humans or the shamans to connect to the hidden realities of nature. And shamanism is its toolkit. Shamanism overall then is an action, as an intention arising purely from experiential perspective. For the shaman, then, there is nothing super about supernatural. There's nothing meta about metaphysics, nothing mysterious about the beyond. The shaman, as consciousness, is an animate part of the natural world. They are in it, and when they directly experience it as other consciousness, not just land. They don't have to believe in it, they don't have to pray to it, they don't worship it, praise it, they merely wholly experience it. Shamanism then is not a mythology, it's a methodology. So what are the main practices of this methodology? Okay, well, one, healing. That's a given. Everyone knows a shaman's a healer. Psychological and physical healing through the use of herbalism that goes back as far as the Paleolithic, and this is evidenced by traces of medicinal herbs and even painkillers in fossil teeth. They could find that. Number two, a shaman is a guide for the dead, so they are a psychopomp. That's what that means, a guide for the dead. They are responsible for guiding the consciousness of the dead to their rightful place in the underworld or the sky world. And there was a good reason for this practice, as it was understood that the dead who had not found their proper place could bring calamity to a living community. So many people still believe that in modern society. I think quite a few do. And helping the dead to cross over is something that is, in comparison in the West, clumsily dabbled with in an amateur way, I'm going to say, by Western people in the who's there ghost hunts and haunted house clearances, which would probably make a real shaman laugh. So the shaman has powers to speak with new knowledge, gained from other consciousness, as we've said. But in the pursuit of that knowledge, the shaman ascends their consciousness into the heavens or descends it into the underworld to seek a specific wisdom from other. And when I say other, I mean other consciousness, discarnate or otherwise carnate consciousness. And that the knowledge gained from other will aid, protect and guide the community. So that is a really important function of the shaman. Number four, a prehistoric function of the shaman, this is interesting, was ensuring the ecological balance of their environment by way of interspecies communication, i.e. they talk to the animals. Oh, yes, they did. Yeah. The shaman negotiated covenants between his people and the consciousness of hunted species, a pact, if you like, for the animals to provide what the tribe needed. And in exchange, the shaman gave the animals a promise that they would be protected from other hunters and not overhunted. So you can see that through the insightful knowledge, instinctive, wise knowledge of the natural world, the migration of herds, the flights of birds, the changes in the weather, the movement of animals, the shaman could ensure success in a hunt and survival for their people from season to season. And lastly, the shaman was the dreamer of dreams. And this is dreams that are not merely the brain sorting through information or working out stuff that it's got in its subconscious state, but lucid dreams, vivid dreams, dreams that contain messages, visions, information, all given whilst in a sleeping state for a useful and practical purpose. So the wide responsibilities this isn't everything, but these wide responsibilities of a shaman mean that they belong not only to the heavens, but equally to the earth, to the land, and to their community. And it is a life where, as a human, they are part of nature. They are not something existing separately from it, and more importantly, in opposition to it. In today's modern world, I think humans are severely displaced from nature, and thereby displaced from their innermost selves. So being connected to the consciousness of all external things in the world, the shaman is able to achieve what could be described as impossible magic. To us, that's what it seems like. But there are plenty of shamans in the world indigenous cultures that are still practicing it right now in the modern world. And I just want to talk to you about a few of those that are really good examples. And these are ones that the West know about. There must be hundreds, thousands maybe that we don't. Now in Eurasia, the Eurasian continent, the Eurasian steppes, surviving shamanism it's thriving basically, but it's not evolved in isolation. On this continent, because I think the shamanism there is undoubtedly a remnant of the prehistoric shamanism that existed 12,000 years ago. It's a remnant, or maybe even the progenitor of the Tashtepla culture. Andrew Collins has written about this link between the Eurasian steppes and Tashtepla in his books, and I think more of which today J.J. Ainsworth is going to be talking about later. But this is where I want to tell you about a Siberian shaman, or Kam, as they say in Siberia, called Maria Amanchina. Now, Maria lived in the Altai region of the Ukok Plateau, which is part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Cultural and Natural Significance in Siberia. Maria's parents were shamans, and people would come to them to be healed. Nothing that astonishing, but such practices were strictly forbidden in Soviet times. So her parents used to help people in secret, and it was through her mother's family line that Maria became a shaman, discovering as a little girl that she was able to heal people and see into the future. Throughout the steppes, shamanism there, it's more common for shamans to be female, and the abilities are passed down the matriarchal line. Now, she hadn't known that she would become a strong healer until she grew older in her late 20s. Maria then at that time became quite ill, and a local healer told her that nobody could cure her and that she had to heal herself by answering the call of the spirit of Altai. And so she set off on a shamanic journey to become a shaman and relying on her guidance, visions, dreams, intuitions. And over the next 20 years, little by little, she became the very powerful and famous healer she is still today in Siberia. And part of how she became a shaman over those 20 years involved a vision and a dream. And this will demonstrate the difference between our dreams and the dreams of a shaman. And she describes it in her own words for National Geographic magazine. She says, Once when I was in my teens, I was looking after some sheep grazing on a summer pasture and I dozed off. I dreamed of a white bearded man all clad in white. He told me it was time for him to leave the Altai and its people, but promised to return in 20 years. He said that, as proof of his promise, he would send my sheep back home right now. When I awoke, I actually saw a white rider galloping away into the distance, and when I returned home, the sheep were already there. My father then explained to me that I had met the spirit of Altai, our protector, whose home was on Balucha Mountain. The spirit of Altai did return from Balucha as promised. He sought Maria out in her dreams again, but he warned her of a coming earthquake. He said it was the land's response to the violation of a tomb or kurgan of a Bronze Age princess who was buried there called Kadin. He gave her detailed instructions on how she should conduct rituals over the next 3 years to spare the lives of all the local people. And while the 2003 earthquake in that region devastated buildings throughout the southern part of the Altai, even levelling entire villages, not one single human perished. So here she is on the Ukot Plateau for National Geographic, conducting a ceremony to reaffirm her commitment to bring the remains of the Bronze Age Princess Kadin back home from the Novosibirsk Center of Russian Academy of Sciences. The Altai shamans, who still live there, believe that the ancient noblewoman played a vital role in keeping the Altai and its people in balance and protected from all threats. So all of their ancestors buried there are a key part in the landscape and its vitality and balance. So Maria explains that the relationship between people and the sacred Ukot Plateau and the ancestors is direct, ever-present, vital. Again, the language that Maria is using tells us about animism and how they are connected to their ancestors and the land, and all are one and unified together. So sadly, the Siberian shaman princess is still in the museum. But Maria's story, I think, illustrates perfectly the gravitas and power of dreams, not just upon an individual, but upon an entire community. I mean, whilst Western civilization may regard dreams as nothing but a way to understand somebody's psychological state, like in a Freudian sense, for the shaman and shamanic cultures, dreams are tools for survival. I mean, they're even aids to great power. And what is clear is that through animism, a shaman works with nature, not against it. They remain connected to the flux and mutability, the change and the constant becoming of the land and the natural world. Unlike us, it is crucial that shamans are not displaced from nature, but train instead for many years, decades, to remain deeply connected to it. The shaman then is a highly dedicated and disciplined human, has trained most of their lives. And amazingly, this is something I do find difficult to get my head around. There are people in Western modernity that claim to be shamans after only a few months of banging a drum and chanting. And to me, that is farcical mumbo jumbo. Okay, this is Utsia Bu. Now, he's important. He is a Mongolian shaman. He's a great example because he is supposedly one of the last authentic black shamans of the steppes. Now, this is a term that was given to any sects of shamans on the steppes that resisted the influence of Buddhism in the 16th century under the ruler Altan Khan. Many sects of shamans across the steppes adopted some Buddhist ideas and practices and beliefs and some elements of Buddhism into their practice. But apparently, a few of the Mongolian sects just outright refused, and consequently they were isolated and then inevitably vilified as being dark or evil black shamans. So, itching my face. So today, I think in Mongolia, there's been a bit of a revival for shamanism. So it's neo-Mongolian shamanism. They're finding their feet again now that it's allowed. Tengarism is all that had a revival. But the original black shamanism is supposed to be all but dead across the steppes. Now, Mongolian shamanism is strongly ancestral in principle. They believe strongly in the ancestral lineage and their connection to the ancestors that goes all the way back to the dawn of civilization. That's what they believe. So black shamanism and its resistance to Buddhist influence and its claim to this ancestral lineage that goes back to, they say, the time of the builders of the kurgans, the time before, back to prehistory. It makes it a good example of maybe what the Tash Tepler shamans of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe may have been like. Now, the record called The Secret History of the Mongols recounts some tales of the original black shamans of the steppes. And these are accounts of shamans so powerful that they were able to apparently control an invisible force in their bodies and channel it to affect others, move things, control others, and even kill them. They could apparently control the weather. They've been known to raise the four winds or tempestuous storms, lightning, all of this to turn the tides of war or battles and aid their own warriors. It was said that they could shift their consciousness into any animal, immediately taking on the abilities and senses of that animal and also commanding it to their will in a kind of symbiosis. So these stories of the black shamans, they are incredible, but they're there. It's said that these shamans could bilocate, crossing vast distances to appear in two places at the same time. They could even physically shapeshift. That's the claim, shapeshift into animals of prey specifically, and then raise armies of other fierce animals of prey to fight wars or win battles or aid warriors. It's said that the original black shamans of the steppes were so powerful that even Genghis Khan was terrified of them, eventually, inevitably, ordering their elimination. But he didn't get them all, because this is 1910. So, but imagine it though, if you could project your consciousness into an animal, see the world through their super senses, what knowledge could you gather? From a bird's eye view, you could find the migration paths that your tribe needed to migrate from one place to the next. You could feel the magnetic fields of the earth. I mean that's just for starters. But here he is, Otsir Bu, supposedly the last black shaman of the steppes. And despite whatever you think of these stories, whether you believe them or not, I mean, look at him. You wouldn't mess with this dude, would you? You know. Right, the best till last. Now, this is John Chang, the so-called Magus of Java. Now, I know he's not a Eurasian steppe shaman, and I'm deviating to Indonesia, but Indonesia has a rich heritage of shamanism that goes, and lots of variety of shamanism that goes all the way back to the prehistoric. And this guy is an amazing example of what I think modern shamanism and old shamanism come to meet each other. And what we could say about this man could fill a whole book, and it has. So this is the book written about him by one of his apprentices, the Magus of Java, teaching of an authentic Taoist immortal. And of all the stories and records of shamans around the world and their incredible powers and their abilities that still exist, this shaman is the most credible to me. And he's probably the most credible that's ever come to light in the civilized world. So there was an award-winning documentary made called The Ring of Fire, an Indonesian Odyssey, and then later rehashed into something called Man, Magic and Myths, or Myths, Magic and Monsters, I remember. It was by brothers Lawrence and Lorne Blair in 1988, and that documents some of John's abilities. For years, the filmmaking duo followed him around Java, pleading with him to be allowed to film him, but he always refused, saying that this was an ancient and secret tradition. And it was when Lorne Blair had an eye infection that they went to John for help that he agreed to be filmed. For the film, he requested his identity be protected, and he was referred to, therefore, as Dynamo Jack, or DJ for short. The name was in relation to the amazing current of energy or electricity that he was able to produce by his own body. So in this documentary, DJ, showed the world how he could use chi, I think we all know what that means here, to heal his patients. But not just in any normal chi method, like acupuncture or acupressure or Tai Chi or something, but by sending a direct electric impulses into the people's bodies. All he needed to do was touch certain areas of a person's body and a powerful electric current just passed through them, and it would cause uncontrollable twitches and spasms. His power was so strong that he needed an assistant to hold down his patient's body to ground them. These are still shots from the documentary. So for the film, DJ allowed himself to be studied by academics. Now this is the important thing, from various Western universities. And I think these included physicists, a mind science, a psychologist, a medic, and electrical engineers. So the academics took DJ to a random location not of his choosing. They checked his whole body with a metal detector. They put electrical meters on his body, and he was generating no conceivable electric current from anything. And once they were satisfied that there was nothing rigged or no rigged equipment, they witnessed DJ do what can only be described as acts of supernature. And this shot from the documentary, he is holding an LED light bulb and lighting it up by just holding it. And there's one of the academics just holding the other wire and grounding it. And here in this short film, DJ is demonstrating how controlling chi through his hand, which you'll see in a bit, can be put into an object, and he can push that object through a wooden table. So here he's pushing a chopstick through a solid wooden table. And in this still shot, DJ is using something called an Indonesian Kris dagger. Now this is like a spirit dagger along the same lines as a Tibetan puba. They're supposed to contain powerful spirits, and the community in Java bring them regularly to DJ to verify if the dagger is real or if there's anything in it. And in the film, DJ explains what he's doing, and he demonstrates that there could be a spirit in this dagger and how he's going to find out. So he uses his projected chi again. He puts a field of chi around the dagger, and he said that's what helps a spirit to manifest if it is there. If one is present, it will show itself. So he generates this film, and again, it's a glass table, there's nothing rigged, and in the film, once he's done that, you see the knife spinning on the table, and no one has gone near it or touched it. And despite searching his body, the room, and several other thorough tests, the academics could find no evidence of fraud, but also, therefore, no scientific explanation. The documentary also witnesses DJ demonstrate that projected chi into his hand can catch rifle pellets. It can also spontaneously set fire to things, and this is known as pyrokinesis, which, if it works, you're about to see in this very short clip.
Big city where Java confronts the 20th century that we got a real shock. Lorne was suffering from a bad eye infection at the time, a cameraman's cause for panic.
Lawrence had heard of a man who might be able to help and dragged me to him, despite my reservations.
Is it in? Good Lord. You just relax and enjoy, Lord.
He uses acupuncture needles in the traditional points, but with a twist. Through them, he directs a form of electricity, as he calls it. But he doesn't draw the electricity from a wall socket. He claims to generate it within his own body. It was nothing like any acupuncture I'd ever had. I was getting really powerful electric shocks and couldn't control my movements at all. He says that what he does is no more supernatural than an electric eel, which also knows how to harness its yin and yang energies.
Yin yang, positive and negative, you know. And my positive from here and my negative from here. And we meet together, this can get like electricity.
And is this because you're special? You have a special sort of
It's for meditation every day.
It's meditation that does it.
Meditation every day. Like a yoga. But I study about 18 years.
18 years?
18 years from my child before.
Can you project this energy through your hands only or through other things as well?
Not only my hand.
Only your hands.
Like you can touch me, like this. It's nothing, okay? It's my burn. Just like this.
Our sound recordist, Simi, was skeptical at first. Later, he told us that anybody could learn this. God had given us all the yin-yang polarity, but it takes discipline and meditation to awaken and control it. And you must be very aware of your emotions. This energy can be dangerous. It can kill as well as heal. Then he asked for our newspaper. Whatever he had done to our newspaper, it's how he'd healed my eyes that made me wonder. What do these people living in the shadows of the volcanoes still know that we of the West have forgotten?
Wow, there you go. Amazing. Again, no evidence of fraud has ever been found. But when talking about the energy, remember what he said here, that the human body can generate. DJ says in that clip, this energy can be dangerous. It can kill as well as heal. And remembering the Mongolian black shamans as well, it's not difficult to imagine that with similar abilities, the Tashtepla shamans could kill as well as heal, that they commanded the forces of both life and death. I think anyone who has the idea that Tashtepla culture may have been all moral sweetness and love and light is just naive. The imagery on their own monuments tells us that rather than being cowed or frightened by the power of nature around them, or that these expressive carvings represent their deepest subconscious fears, I think instead it represents what they valued, what they were connected to, and what they regarded themselves as equal to, and maybe even had command over. And as Lawrence Blair states at the end of that clip, what do these people know that we in the West have forgotten? I think surely this is the question we should all be asking when asking what were the ancients up to. So 2 years after the initial filming of this, DJ found Lawrence Blair again and invited him to meet. And he told him that he'd been away for 2 years in the jungle in Borneo on a deep meditational shamanic journey. He said that in his visions he had seen how history is moving on and how the old wisdom is dying and vanishing. So he had a responsibility to come back and show the world again. And he was filmed once more, but just enough to remind us, and this is in his own words, to remind us, and I quote, that he was not special, that we all have undreamed of powers sleeping within us. So, the actual word shaman is derived from the Siberian Tungusic word for spiritual leader, meaning one who is raised. And Skywalker is a direct reference to the shaman that traverses the sky world. Again, another great quote from Terence McKenna. In shamanism, the life force, as we've found, this life force that they command is accessed through animism, or the observation, I suppose, and experience of all living things having consciousness, and all consciousness sharing a connection and being able to intercommunicate with a web or matrix of all consciousness through that connection. I mean, we never really know what the force is in Star Wars, other than it's an energy field that is created by and surrounds by all living things. And the ability to engage and manipulate that field for good or bad becomes a story that we all get drawn into with Star Wars. But the force may be chi, ki, prana, weird, orgone, life force, whatever you want to call it. It remains something known literally to shamans. But for us civilized people, just a mystery or a fantasy. But I think, archaic traditions, I think all over the world, found that amongst most tribes, they all claim for shamanism a celestial origin in the stars, or the so-called sky world. So, and that shaman, as a skywalker, literally, maintains a direct communication between humanity on the surface of the earth with the celestial realms and through the dimensions beyond, to hyperspace even. So the question becomes whether modern science can attempt to understand this, and whether really it even has any basis in doing so. I mean, who do we think we are, grasping for the knowledge that the shaman has already possessed for millennia? I mean, when for centuries the most advanced Western minds in philosophy and science couldn't even answer the question of being. Anyway, sorry, this is an old philosopher's grudge. I will move on. So, modern quantum physics. I'm not going to go on about that. I'm sure a lot of you know a lot about that. But if you don't know, it's a science focused on the study and understanding of the smallest particles known, such as quarks, and how these make up the reality of physical matter. But quantum physicists today, interestingly enough, are now focusing upon the science of consciousness to understand how quantum mechanics can form part of what makes up the human mind, I suppose. It's also therefore become a study of how humans do things, their intentionality, their will, things like that, and how they interact with phenomena in the world as noumena, mind. So, as this quote says here, can the future of quantum mechanics explain the abilities of people like Dynamo Jack? Will it get there? Will it be able to explain the relationship between mind and matter, as physicist David Bohm believed? He's no longer with us, but he had this strong belief that it would and it could. Eventually, will we, the civilized humans, cease to be so primitive? Can we become as advanced as the shaman and as the shamans of the Tash Tepler culture? Can we know what they knew? So, the energetic bodily powers of the shaman are already well attested over European cave and rock paintings. Now, if we remember what DJ said about his positive and negative and the electricity being generated from those in his abdomen and coming out, this is a rock painting here of a shaman in Sweden, I believe. Why has he got those swirly patterns? Is that what this is about? And the quote again, a great one from Terence McKenna: the shaman is the figure at the dawning of human history that unites the doctor, the scientist and the artist into a single notion of caregiving and creativity. And, I think if we look at that power, if we think about what we've seen in people like Dynamo Jack, is because they have these powers, like a Jedi, I suppose, is that the reason they have no need for religion? or worshipping anything at all. They don't worship anything abstract or supposedly higher, greater, better, beyond. They are not concerned also with the machinations of culture. I think as a shaman, they stand outside of the culture that they serve. They stand outside it in order to see it. And I think that's how they are able to see and perform what seems like trickery or amazing things, because they are outside the culture with which they serve. And I think overall the shaman knows that culture is a construction behind which a real matrix of reality exists as pure consciousness, binding all things. They know that modern civilization is a game which everyone else takes seriously, and that may be how they can do their magic. So, although the colonial tropes about tribal cultures and shamanic practice might be coming to an end in the liberal 21st century, are they coming to an end within archaeology and anthropology? And more importantly, within our sphere of interest, the forbidden archaeology, the speculative history upon ancient origins. In our genre, should we be asking ourselves whether we really do look upon the past with open eyes, or are we as guilty of that remote, analytical and superior colonial gaze as our ancestors in Victorian times? And don't forget, it's a regard that has vilified, dominated and decimated shamanic cultures worldwide. Are we still afraid to talk about spiritualism, metaphysics, supernature? The facts are that shamanism is widely considered to be superstitious mumbo-jumbo, looked down upon and derided by the increasing materialist view of scientism in the West, even by people who are uncovering Tashtepla culture today. That's the worrying thing. But when we look at these individual figures that we've talked about today, and we see some of the testament of their abilities, it is clear that these people are not primitive in any way. They are powerful. The shamans of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe were not just gadding about with animal bits. Their activities were far more complex and astonishing than that. And it is not then, I think, far-fetched to speculate that Tashtepla shamans were not just advanced builders and engineers, but advanced humans with vastly superior abilities to our own. If people like DJ exist as just a remnant, just imagine him, he's just a remnant of the shamanism from the past, then it's not a jump to say that Tashtepla people were not just super civilization, but superhumans. I mean, you may inwardly scoff at some of the things, the abilities that you've seen in this presentation and the things that we've talked about. I mean, I do, it's natural, you should do that. It's a natural Western thing to do. But then just ask yourself, is that scepticism helpful? Is it actually helpful? Does it just deride from a deeply ingrained culturally colonial perspective? Does it further your knowledge of these ancient cultures? Does it? Can it? Or does it merely limit it? Does that rationalist prejudice, which I've been guilty of, help you answer the question in full of what the ancients were up to? Can it? I think, personally, that Western minds are unlikely to ever answer the question fully of what the ancients were up to if their observation continues to be Cartesian, coloured by their own insidious conditioning of their own culture. But maybe I am preaching to the converted here. I think I am. But I wanted to emphasise that looking at origins is not just about sites, monuments, symbols, tools, measurements. It's not about framing it against the understanding we have now in our civilization, our modern perspective. It's not about alignments, but enlightenment, perhaps. It's about looking at what has been lost, the unknown, things which might seem alien to us. And I'm not talking about ancient aliens. For me, that perspective never gives our own species enough credit. It is a modern religion even, perhaps, that that sees us as inferior to godlike beings coming down from space to save us. But nothing about any of the shamanic figures or cultures that I have researched tells me that they were powerless, waiting for gods from the sky to come and save them or advance them. Nothing. I therefore have no doubts that the Tash Tepler, original Tash Tepler shamans, were no different. So shamanism is not a religion, it's a method. And when this method is practiced with humility, reverence and self-discipline, the shaman's path can become a way of life. And this was said by Hank Wesselman, who is a really open-minded anthropologist who wrote a book about a shaman from the future, which I won't spoil, or I don't have time to go into now. But with this testimony of anthropologist Hank Wesselman in mind, when we're looking back at Tash Tepler culture for answers, and perhaps even now, for answers to what is the greatest human power, we are not looking at our past, but to our future. Tash Tepler could be our future. And I don't mean a future that survives just some cataclysmic change on the planet and we're all reduced to the Stone Age. But I mean one where science and humanism finally brings us to an understanding of what we are. A future where we are no longer detached or displaced from the natural world, and thus from our innermost selves. Where we are all powerful instead of powerless. A future where we are all shamans. Thank you.